numbers might be there. And Josh Newman, who's a contributor for KSL in Salt Lake City, covered Utah and has and continues to, joins us on 365 Sports. Josh, we just had Scott Mitchell on. He was great. So they had the meeting today. There is some speculation about the possibility of details. In your opinion, if the number that is at the base is like $20 million, whether there's incentives for subscriptions or et cetera, whatever it might be, which means that it's not really there, but it can be. What number have you heard, and not just Utah, but what number have you heard that the Pac-12 needs to reach to keep everybody happy? Because obviously Colorado didn't like what they saw or thought they had.
Yeah, my understanding before this meeting today was that, the Pac-12 number had to come in, comparable to what the Big 12 is getting now, approaching that. Now, in my personal opinion, if we're talking a matter of like $3 million, $4 million away, that's a wash because, at $3 million, $4 million away, you're still in the neighborhood, right, of the Big 12, and you're still getting yourself lined up for the next TV deal. Okay. Now that's what a lot of this is about, right? We saw the meeting happen today. We saw what Pete Thamel reported. This is a Apple TV centric media rights deal, primarily streaming. And look, on the surface, it might not make much sense now, but what has to happen now is the presidents and the chancellors and the athletic directors have to absorb what they heard today from the commissioner, George Kliavkoff, and they not only have to decide if it makes sense now, but does it make sense down the road in 2028, 2030 when you're going back to the bargaining table? So, as has been the case here for 13, 14 months, the Pac-12 has kind of been at a sort of crossroads. And they remain at that crossroads now, with the recent happenings with Colorado opting to leave to go home to the Big 12. Not only that, but also what happened today at this meeting, learning what the media rights deal could look like here.
So, Josh, what would be the hang-ups for, Arizona appears to be the one that's most likely to pull the trigger fastest because outside of Colorado, they've been the ones that seem to be most flirtatious with the idea of being somewhere else. But for Utah, Arizona State, what would be their hang-ups about, look, if there's an $11 million, $12 million gap about just taking the Big 12 deal if they can get it?
Look, I can't speak to what Arizona's mindset is right now, but from a Utah perspective, 10 days ago at Pac-12 Media Day, right, Mark Harlan, the athletic director, was on stage in Las Vegas, and he made it very clear what Utah's position is. Specifically, Utah. Their position is that they are a member of the Pac-12. They want to remain a member of the Pac-12, and they want to see this thing through. Now, that was before the Colorado news. That was before today's meeting. How much has changed for Utah since then? I don't know that a whole lot has changed, right? That has been, the consistent position of the athletic department and of the university, publicly behind closed doors. They want to remain a member of the Pac-12. Now, look, that's not to say that there have not been back channel conversations and some meetings with the Big 12. The University of Utah has certainly had, I don't want to call it preliminary conversations with the Big Ten, but they've certainly reached out for feedback. And my personal opinion, I do think that there is an avenue for, not now, but for Utah at some point down the road to wind up in the Big Ten. Not on this round, but I do think that there's an avenue to be had in the next round when we do this again in 2027, 28, 30. So, Utah is trying to line itself up now, what makes sense now, but also what makes sense down the road. Now, in terms of right now, it's been made pretty clear that Utah is not going to be the aggressor here, right? They are just not going to follow Colorado out the door. I think there is some sense here locally that, okay, Arizona is the linchpin. If Arizona opts to leave, my question then becomes, well, do they have to take Arizona State with them? Is it a package deal? So then if you're talking about Arizona and Arizona State leaving, that puts the Big 12 at 15. If you want to get to an even number at 15, then Utah kind of comes more into the discussion as a potential 16th member at the Big 12.
So they don't want to be the one that like unties the shoestrings fall apart, right? They want to, if in fact they need you, but isn't Utah in the position to do whatever the hell they want? Aren't they that good right now?
I don't know if they're in a position to do whatever they want. I mean, yeah, look, they're unofficially, they're the preeminent football power in the Pac-12. until somebody says that they're not, right? They beat USC twice last year, including in the Pac-12 championship game. But look, you guys cover college athletics. It's not all about football, and it's not all about athletics. Athletics on a major college campus like Utah, that's only a small part of the university machine. Now, look, from an academic standpoint, Utah is an AAU member. I believe 5 or 6 Pac-12 schools are still AAU members. So you have to consider the fact that Taylor Randall, the president at the University of Utah, let's say in a vacuum that he wants to leave the Pac-12 for the Big 12. Taylor Randall would have to walk into his board of trustees and explain why he wants to take his university out of the Pac-12 as it currently stands with half a dozen AAU members and move it to the Big 12 with 1. And Utah is a Tier 1 research institution now, so there's a lot of factors going on here besides athletics. So it's not just as simple as, well, Utah can do whatever it wants. Utah this, athletics, football, all the women's sports that have had success, that's great, and that's a part of the puzzle, but it's not the entire puzzle.
Okay, so when we had Scott Mitchell on with Baylor, as you know, Josh, they will play Utah in September, which will be a hell of a home game for Baylor. Should be a packed house, and then they have Texas right around the corner, and they're coming off a 6-7. We know what Utah is. What is that thought about that game? Because 2 years ago, Brigham Young comes to Waco. That same year, they end up in the Big 12. This year, Colorado's playing at TCU, and next year they're a part of the Big 12. So I'm not trying to say anything, but it does seem interesting that game is being played this year.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't try to connect those dots too much, but from a right now Utah Baylor game standpoint, I think it's interesting because we have a situation here where Cam Rising, right, the 6th-year senior quarterback, is coming off a torn ACL, and they are kind of up against the clock here trying to get Rising ready for the opener here on August 31st against against Florida, with Baylor to come after that game. So the situation now is very interesting because if Rising cannot go, you are looking at a situation where Brandon Rose, a redshirt freshman who has never taken a collegiate snap, would be in line to start against Florida on August 31st. Now, with that, I do believe that if Brandon Rose were to start, he is capable of beating Florida here in Salt Lake City at Rice-Eccles Stadium, where Utah has been untouchable for 2.5 seasons. So you can beat Florida with Rose and with help, but I think asking Rose to walk into Baylor and to do it again, I think that's a much tougher task. So if you're without Rising for that Baylor game, things get a lot more interesting for Utah, just with a complete lack of experience at the QB position.
The good news for Utah in that Florida game is they have a quarterback who's never taken a snap, but Florida has quarterbacks that their fans wish had never taken a snap before. They're stressed out in Gainesville about who that's going to be right now, Josh. So even if they have to navigate the early part of the season without Cam Rising, do you feel good about them through the later part of the season when he comes back, being able to stay in that race, given that the league, which is the saddest part about this whole Pac-12 thing, is this might be as good as they will have ever been top to bottom?
No, and that's a great point. I mean, the Pac-12 is kind of set up from a strictly football standpoint. This is potentially the most interesting Pac-12 football season in recent memory, specifically because of the quarterback talent between Cam Rising and Caleb Williams, and Michael Penix Jr. at Washington, and Bo Nix at Oregon, and on down the list. You've got, 8 of the 12 teams have like legitimate starting quarterbacks. So, and it's a shame that, all of this realignment stuff has kind of taken over everything. And of course, this is not getting settled today, right? This is going to go on for weeks, if not months. So, with Rising, I really do believe, just having watched Rising and having watched Utah the last 2 seasons, if Rising is healthy, if he is fully capable at 100%, anything is possible for Utah. That said, this is the most brutal schedule that they've played in program history. You've got 11 Power 5 games. I said Florida and Baylor. Look, you have to go to Oregon State on a Friday night. It's going to be a zoo. You have to go to USC. You have to go to Washington in November. Washington could still be in the college football playoff mix. You have to go to Seattle with the weather in November. You have to host Oregon again. So it's a very treacherous road. Now, again, if Rising is ready, anything's possible. Now, there is some thinking that, look, if he's not ready for the opener, okay? If he misses Florida, if he misses Baylor, hold him out the next week, okay, against Weber State, an FCS team down here. There's definitely a belief that if he is ready for the Pac-12 opener on September 23rd, that would suffice for everybody, because at least you're putting yourself in the mix to win the Pac-12 if he's ready by the Pac-12 opener.
All right, Josh, so in the end, if it's $20 million or so, you've given a number. Even Scott Mitchell kind of gave us a number. No one knows what the heck yet it really is. But if you were to put on a scale of 1 to 10 that Utah would be a part of the Big 12 starting in 2024, would that number for you, I'm going to guess, would be like a 3? Would it even be that high, or would it be a little bit higher than that just on the unknown of what's going on with the media deal?
Yeah, as you were talking and asking that question, my immediate knee-jerk number was 3. I just don't think there's a lot of possibility there. Now, look, if things go completely haywire, okay, if Arizona bails and Arizona State, if things really start falling apart, we can talk about this again. But sitting here right now, knowing what we know, knowing what went on in that meeting today, yeah, I would put the possibility of Utah joining the Big 12 in time for 2024. I would put that at a 3.5 right now.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate your time with KSL.com, a contributor covering the University of Utah, the Utes, and coming